I'm going to let you in on a secret. I fail. Often. It's something people don't really talk about, but I think it's important to see that even people with experience fail, and it's a lot more common than you think. That said, I'm going to show you some unedited footage from a project I started this week, and we'll let you see the failure as it unfolds, and I'll give commentary so that you can understand what I was thinking as the project started to fall apart, and what I learned as a result. So let's get started. So here's a Haunted Mansion bust that I came into possession of. And I've got a couple of acrylic paints that I've mixed together and thinned out with a bit of Windex. And I've busted out my airbrush because I thought, what better way to get paint down into the recesses than to airbrush it in there, because a brush would leave harder edge lines. Now, I don't spend a ton of time using my airbrush, and I'm immediately realizing that I need to spend more time with my airbrush. I mean, my hands shake a bit, so, you know, getting straight lines isn't really going to be in the cards for me. I know that. But I'm giving it the old college try, and, you know, I'm getting into the recesses, and I'm working the paint around. And of course, the airbrush I keep having issues with because I haven't thoroughly thinned the paint. And I probably should have strained the paint as well, just to make sure that there weren't any like globs in it, which always happens. And you can see every time I kind of drop the airbrush down, I'm trying to clear out something that's in the nozzle, which is impacting the overall quality of the paint that's being applied. And you can see here, like, these lines are really harsh. And the whole time I'm thinking, well, you know, I can probably like come back and dry brush over the top of it. It'll be fine. It's all gonna be fine. So I thin out the paint a little bit more, see if I can kind of get rid of any issues, because it's really clogged up. And I'm working the wrinkles. And then I realize, no, this paint's going on heavy now. Have I kind of screwed myself a little bit? Maybe. I don't know. I'm gonna keep working it. And it's kind of right around this point that I start to think, okay, just go heavy. Go heavy, and then you can really come back in with other paint and help make it less severe. And I thought, okay, well, yeah, I guess that could work. But you know, watching it back now, it's odd seeing it on camera. It's much heavier looking on camera than it looked in person, so I thought that there was still a possibility that I could pull it out. And I keep thinning down the paint, and I keep running into issues with the airbrush, which, dumb of me. I should have just stopped. Really made sure that the brush was clean, and that that my paint was thinned so that I wouldn't run into these issues. But I didn't. I just kept on soldiering through. So at some point I ended up dumping out all the paint, cleaning out the airbrush, and now I'm back painting some more. And again, you know, the paint is flowing better this time. I thinned it out a bit more, which I really should have done to start off with. But I'm quickly realizing that I think I just thought, you know what, like I will dry brush my way out of this, because dry brushing does kind of hide a lot of the crimes and helps to really even out surfaces and stuff like that. And so I think at this point I'm kind of coming to the realization that this plan has not worked out the way that I was hoping it would. But let me go and do the things that I normally would do. So I start to really like get into the recesses and try to highlight all of the areas that I would think would be dark. And I'm also thinking in the back of my head about how the one used in the ride, the paint job's terrible. It's like really contrasty and looks very amateurish, but you're seeing it from a distance, so it looks great. And so now I'm thinking, well, okay, let me just go super heavy. Like, let me paint this the way that I would think I would paint like a skull. So I go really dark in the cheeks and really dark in the temples. And I'm still thinking like, yep, I'm totally gonna pull this out. It's gonna be great. I'll just be able to come in here and dry brush this to success. And I start to kind of fade the colors a bit, and I'm thinking of areas where, you know, there should be some more contrast. And the whole time I'm thinking about the picture and how garish the paint job is. So I'm going, all right, well, you know, it's not that bad. It could be worse. And I'm also kind of giving myself a bit of a pass because, again, like I said, I don't use the airbrush as often as I should. And, you know, it's great for broad stroke stuff. That's kind of how I use it. I'm not really great at detailed stuff with an airbrush. And again, that's kind of like, it goes back to really like mastering your tools. But, you know, also don't be afraid to just get out there and try something different. And that's kind of where I found myself in this point. So now I'm just going super heavy. And I'm hating it the whole time because I know that I've kind of gone too far. But, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound, like, what can you do? So my first thought was, all right, I'm going to dust this entire piece with the base color. And that should soften a lot of those hard lines. And it kind of does. But I'm also realizing in the moment that, this sculpt is very rough. And I don't know if it's just a result of being recast a million times or if it was just done really quickly. Because I know like the Hatbox Ghost sculpt is not particularly smooth. And as I'm doing this, I'm going, okay, well, you know, the base paint has sort of softened a lot of it, but it still looks pretty bad. So let me come in here with a really bright white and try to make all of the high spots pop. And that's when I realized just how textured this sculpt is. The base coat of paint was a flat blue, or like a flat pale blue. It's actually chalk paint, which was hiding all of this weird texture. And now the dry brushing was accentuating something that I didn't realize was there. And it's in this moment that I'm thinking, well, I really kind of screwed it. It's done. Like, I'm gonna keep applying paint to see what happens, but I think deep down inside, I know that this is not salvageable at this point. But, you know, you keep trying, and oftentimes I've found that sort of pushing the limits ends up getting me to a place that I wouldn't have gotten to normally, and it works really well. And sometimes it doesn't, and this is one of those times. I mean, you can really see on the cheeks and on the nose just how textured this guy is. And I kind of think, like, do I leave it? I mean, it doesn't look that bad. So I thought, all right, well, let me try dusting it again with the base color. Maybe it'll soften some of the dry brushing. And it kind of does, but it's still not great. The texture of the casting is like really distracting. So, you know, I'm looking at it with my own eyes, and then I'd step back behind the camera to see what it looks like on camera. And then I'd look at it again, think, well, I mean, I guess on camera it's not that terrible. But then I just came to the realization that it's just not great and I don't love it. And so I went back and grabbed the base paint, and now I'm covering the whole thing up again. Well, that was 45 minutes wasted. I mean, wasted, I guess, not so much. I learned a lot in the process of doing this. You know, the biggest takeaway from this build is that A, don't be afraid to try something and fail miserably, which clearly that's what happened to me. But as I'm watching this back, I'm having a ton of thoughts about how I could have approached this differently that may have worked better with my weaknesses as an artist. The biggest one being, maybe if I'd started with a darker color and then used the airbrush just to get all of the highlights, I might have been able to make the gradation between the wrinkles and the higher spots in the face look more natural, because I wasn't aiming for such a small target. It was a much broader target. So I may go back and try that. Paint choice was another one. The chalk paint is a great color, but the texture that it leaves behind is not great. And I think what ended up happening was that the texture of the chalk paint did not mesh well with the thinned out acrylic. And so what was happening was that it was creating a very dusty appearance, even on the areas where I had just lightly airbrushed over it. Things just looked dusty. I don't know really how else to describe it. And so my thought, as we come to a close, is smooth out the casting a bit more. And that may be just like a matter of doing a 2K clear coat that's going to give it a much flatter surface to apply paint to. And then that way, if I do lay in paint and need to wipe any of it off, I'm not fighting the texture of that chalk paint. The other thing I need to remind myself of is that the version that's used in the ride doesn't look great to begin with. So anything that I can do that looks even slightly better than that is going to be an improvement on something that is theme park quality. So, you know, keep that in mind, I guess. And I guess the last thing that I think is really important to remember for all of us, regardless of what we're making, is that nothing is ever perfect. Perfect is this sort of large concept that I think people ascribe to anything that they think is very important. You know, this painting has to be perfect. My dress has to be perfect. I have to have the perfect car, the perfect whatever. And the truth is, things are never really perfect. They are perfect to the individual. They may not be perfect to the world as a whole. So even if it may not look like something you saw in a movie or in a theme park, as long as you think it's perfect, well, that's a win. So that's where I'm going to leave it for this video. I hope there was some interesting takeaways for everybody that watched, and to understand that failure isn't always a bad thing. Well, if you like this video or the other videos that I've done, be sure to subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, tell me about your failures. I'll tell you more about mine if you care, and I'll see you on the next one. Go make something.